All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our second engagement webinar, part of the larger Advancing Democracy webinar series, all open to the public, all aimed to help you all meet this moment with best practices, strategies, whether you're new to the Advancing Democracy world or if you've been in one of our fellowships before. Everyone is welcome in this space. We know you have a lot of demands on your time, so thank you for carving out this bit of time in this space and this community. Bridget will kick it off in just a moment, but I will enter my email in the chat if you all have any questions about advancing democracy or anything you learn about today. Feel free to send me, shoot me an email or just a DM on this Zoom meeting, and I will be dropping in the chat and the follow-up email links to learn more about advancing democracy and information about our upcoming solutions journalism webinars. September will be the month of solutions journalism. We have 3 webinars, everything from introductions to advanced beat reporting. And so I'll be excited to share that with you all in the chat in that follow-up email. But Bridget, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessel. Thank you for those of us joining us live today, or if you're watching the recording later. So I'm Bridget Thorson, and over my time at Hearken, where we work with newsrooms on their engagement practices, I've worked with more than 145 newsrooms. And one thing that has been common across all of those experiences is however well you plan, however carefully you craft your engagement efforts, challenges will come up, right? And so that's why today I'm so excited to be talking about, really honestly and openly, the challenges that newsrooms face when trying to engage their communities, whether that's democracy-related reporting, which is the focus of Advancing Democracy, or just in general, and also look at strategies we can use to overcome those challenges. I'm delighted to introduce our co-facilitator today, Stephanie Rivera from Colorado Public Radio, and in just a moment, she will be sharing more about some of her newsroom's democracy-related work from 2024. But first, I want to turn things over to you in the chat, and we've already had a lot of great introductions. We are, after all, here to talk about engagement journalism, so I want to be sure you all have the chance to engage a lot with today's session. So let me just say from the outset, this is not just me and Stephanie talking to you. We really want to make this a conversation. So at any time, whether it's in the chat or just by speaking out in the webinar, if you can, I want to bring your voices in here, and particularly as we start talking through the challenges that come up during different phases of the engagement cycle. I'm certainly not the only holder of advice or expertise on this topic. There's a lot of incredible people in the room today. So please, please feel free to make this a conversation. And I'd just like you to think for a moment about what you would like to get out of today's session. And as I go through sort of the plan for today, feel free to pop that in the chat for us. We want to be sure we're responding to what you need to know. So, a quick note about Hearken, if you haven't worked with us or if you aren't familiar with us, we really work with newsrooms on community engagement to impact systems for the public good. And we've done a number of these initiatives, both with Solutions Journalism Network and others. And as you'll hear, like projects like Stephanie's project with Colorado Public Radio, focused specifically on political reporting and democracy supporting coverage, including Election SOS. And just so you know, Jessel mentioned, this is the second engagement-focused webinar that we've done for Advancing Democracy. And I'll just pop in the chat here real quick, the recording from our last webinar where we went through sort of the engagement life cycle. Today's really going to be about what to do when things go off the rails, right? When things don't go as planned. So just getting oriented really quick, and please feel free to keep popping in there what you want to get out of today. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the mic over to Stephanie to talk about what they worked on in 2024 and also set the frame for how we can talk about these challenges to engagement. Then I'm really excited to go through our expectations for our engagement projects and how we might be able to have better success with the times that they don't go as planned, if we change our mindset a little bit before we start talking specifically about how we address those engagement challenges. Now we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, but again, this is a webinar about engagement. Let's get that engagement going. So please do, at any moment, feel free to speak up, to pop something in the chat, to let us know what we can do to be useful to you. Okay, so I'm looking through here about what we're looking for from today's session. Welcome, welcome. We're looking for creating a strategy for community listening sessions. Excellent. And also, we have some great resources from a webinar on the art of hosting recently that we can share with you later. Welcome, welcome. Hoping to, oh, great, Stephanie, you've got a fan in the chat. Benefit from her knowledge, no pressure. Excellent. Looking for ways to build trust with audiences, make engagement reasonable, start publishing community needs. We got a pop-up coming up soon. Organizational buy-in, that's a great, great question. How to roll out community listening events. Okay, I'm hearing a lot around listening events. So I'm making a note that we're going to want to focus on that, especially as we can. Thank you all for bringing into this space today. And with that, Stephanie, I'm going to turn things over to you. I'll keep running these slides here, so you just tell me when you want to move things along to talk a little bit about your work last year.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget, for having me, and great to see everyone there, especially Colorado folks out there. My name is Stephanie Rivera. I am the digital team editor for Colorado Public Radio. We do a lot of audience engagement in my team. We handle editorial products, but also looking at audience analytics and just finding ways that we can connect our reporting with the community in different ways, both online and in person. So you can go to the next slide. So just a little bit background for our project Voter Voices 2024. Colorado Public Radio had done something similar just within the newsroom in 2022 for the midterms, putting out a survey, trying to talk to folks, but we didn't get as much engagement, for a statewide newsroom. And so for 2024, we were able to partner with the Colorado News Collaborative, which is a journalism support organization that has over 100 newsrooms of all sizes in Colorado. So we were the lead newsroom for this project, working with CoLab, as we call them, newsrooms, and really connecting. So it's both an engagement and a collaborative project that we took on in 2024. And it was looking at the general election, but it was also wanting to make sure that we could expand what we started in 2022, which was the Citizens Agenda style reporting. And I think you can go to the next slide. So basically what we did was we had more than 60 Colorado newsrooms, active newsrooms, participate in this project. We created a survey that was shared both online and in person, and the map on the right shows you all the different newsrooms. These are everything from websites, newsletters, really small ethnic media, rural media. We were lucky that with CoLab, we had these newsrooms already be partners in different projects. So the buy-in wasn't too hard in getting them to listen and hear our pitch. So I will say that kind of collaborative nature was key to this, to just starting off. And then I think if you click on it, you should be able to see, yep. So basically, Citizens Agenda style question is, what would you like the candidate to talk about as they compete for your vote? That was central to this question, but we also wanted some demographics to really be able to focus on the different constituents, the different voters for candidates and within the districts. And I think if you click, we should see the survey on that. Yeah, so we had about 11 questions, and I'll say the first challenge we encountered was just right off the bat with the survey we had. Obviously, we know we don't want to have too many questions, but we also wanted to have demographics that were going to help us understand who we're talking to, who are asking these questions of candidates. And we got over 7,200 respondents. We also were able to really pinpoint the needs of voters who identified as Republican, moderates, or Democrats. And it's not a scientific poll. We were more interested in just hearing back from them. And I will say I had mentioned this to Bridget too, that early on, we were thinking it through. We had multiple questions and discussions about this survey. And of course, once it went live, we didn't realize that some respondents had cookies who were saving their information and autofilling. So if you see like one of the questions, it's what is your zip code? We were getting random responses in there as well. So we had to do a lot to kind of clean up the data. So it wasn't perfect, but it really let us know that you can plan ahead as much as you can. But once it goes live and everyone has their different browsers, different issues. So that was our first challenge with that we were able to go back to some of the respondents, ask them to fill out some of the survey form questions and try to clean it up. But so we were using it as much as we can, but we did make it clear that it was not a scientific poll.
Did people generally respond when you asked them to fill it out again, or was it kind of like some?
Yeah, it was some. I think, I think we sent it to over 100, and I think like a quarter of them responded. So it wasn't too bad. Yeah, it helped clean up the data, but definitely lesson learned with that. And then as far as the survey, like I said, because we were partnering with newsrooms all over the state that had their community, we were able to create custom Harken forms, which as anyone who's used Harken knows, like we can really customize it. So we replicated the survey, we sent it out so that we allowed newsrooms who we got buy-in from that wanted to do it, but maybe the extent that they could help was just promote the survey, put it on their website in a digital post and social media and their newsletters. But we were able to create a spreadsheet that had their individual responses as well as the statewide that they can all see. And so while we were, I think every 2 weeks updating the spreadsheet and letting folks know how many respondents we got, newsrooms were also able to see how many they got within their community. And so any way that they wanted to do coverage and let folks know, here's what we're hearing from you statewide compared to the community. So that was one benefit early on that we were able to do in that way through the Harken system, and being able to customize and be able to collect, statewide as well. I think next slide. So over 7,000 respondents, this map shows how many folks we were able to reach, the dark green being the most we've heard from, but we were able to really listen almost in all 4 corners of the region. On the right side, you see a lot of the gray area. That's our Eastern Plains, that borders Kansas, so not a lot of folks there. But it still shows, I think, when you compare it to like our 2022 map where it was just us alone doing this work, it's, night and day difference in how much more folks we were able to get in and listen to. And next slide. So these are the results we got from over 7,000 respondents. You'll see conservatives, we were able to read it all, group it overall, but we also wanted to break it down, as I mentioned earlier. And basically what we did with these, top concerns, we took this information and we went to the Republican candidates, asked them questions based on the top 3 concerns from their Republican voters who were more likely to vote for them. So we asked them about the economy, about immigration. For the Democratic candidates, we combined moderate and liberal results, and we were asking them also about democracy. The environment was a bigger issue for them. And so we were able to go to these candidates with data backing us up, why they should respond to us, why these issues were important, and that it came straight from their constituents. And we were able to do voter guide, questionnaires basically based on these questions as well.
And could you say a little bit more, Stephanie? There's a question in the chat about how these surveys were distributed. Was it through the newsrooms to their existing audiences?
Yeah, so it was online and in person. So the online, I'll speak to the Colorado Public Radio newsroom. We had it in digital posts, we had it in social media, in newsletter callouts, but we also went out in the community. So I myself went out to county fairs. Some of the reporters went out to shopping centers, to libraries, to parks, all of that to collect. So it was a combination of our audience that we know already follows us on one of our platforms, as well as the community in general, in different communities that we made extra efforts to know that we may not hear from them often, and it's not part of our regular audience. So it was a mix of both. Through the Colorado News Collaborative, they have connections with ethnic media, and they reached out to their supporters as well, and just more nonprofit local community groups as well. I will say that one thing that we discussed in our debrief after this project was realizing wanting to have those conversations earlier, especially with the smaller newsrooms or the not traditional newsrooms that have that connection with the community, and really having those conversations and then finding out what maybe barriers they have or anything like that. So again, we felt we started pretty early. I think it was in the spring. We made the survey live in April, but really it's those conversations of just getting to hear folks, their concerns and anything, and really looping that in and preparing for that earlier. So I will say that was another thing that we learned after the fact.
That's great. Thank you.
And next slide. So as I had mentioned earlier, it was over 60 newsrooms of all types involved, but the majority of them could only help by distributing the survey online or in person. They didn't have the bandwidth to be able to help create stories out of these. So it was up to the bigger players, in a sense of collaboration and being neighbors and helping each other, that we were able to convince other big players to write stories. So along with our editor at Colorado Public Radio, Megan, the political affairs reporter or editor, she was able to write along with folks from Colorado Sun, the Denver Post, and Colorado Newsline, just because they had more bandwidth and were able to create stories out of the survey results that we got. So here you have a screenshot of some of the stories that were written based on the survey results, basically letting our readers know how things like housing policy, immigration, how that shows up in the different levels of office and candidates. So if you're voting for a mayor, here's how this person can influence housing policies. Here's how your county commission can influence housing policy. So really breaking it down at different levels just to give readers a sense of why it's important to vote locally, not just for national candidates or statewide offices. And, for I think I mentioned this earlier, for Colorado Public Radio, for our voter guide, we were able to really break down the questions for candidates based on what their, Democratic voters, Republican voters had, and really just make it more meaningful, more impactful voter guide overall that way. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, respondents were also, through Hearken, you have the form that lets you know if you want to be anonymous or not. So for those who did not want to be anonymous, we were able to engage them for other election-related stories, asking them for interviews that could beef up side stories that were being written throughout the election campaign and coverage of all of that throughout the year. So it allowed us not just, data for who our voters are, what they want to know, but also really add more human voices to the coverage.
I really love this, how your vote could affect, and then the topics that you're hearing about. That's such a useful and immediately sort of relevant framing. Couple quick questions for you in the chat. When you're doing online surveys in person, do you know what device was used? Was it an iPad, or did people respond on their phones? How did that work?
It was a mix of all of that. So for me, it was just easier for me, especially because internet challenges when I would go out to the more rural parts. I just printed out the survey. I wrote it down when I was talking to folks, and then I went back online at my desktop and just input the information that way. We also did print out little postcards with QR codes, and we're able to share that out, post them in the community bulletin boards at your local coffee shop, really all different formats that are comfortable for the reporter, that they're able to go out there, and really depends on, again, access to online, to Wi-Fi, and just any kind of way that you can send it out there.
That's great. And then we have a question. Did you allow an other topic section to get an open response beyond sort of the drop downs that you had identified?
So I think That was definitely a conversation that we had as far as how open-ended we wanted it and how really and I think that's why we really discussed the options that we had for folks to choose from. There was a part where maybe they can elaborate on an option, but we also heard from people where it was something not related to those topics. And that
Mhm.
was a space to have that. But we really wanted them to choose something because I think we had like 9 options or something. It was a lot. So we really wanted to be thoughtful to make it easy for ourselves when we were calculating the data and kind of have an overall understanding of that. But we did have an option where people could elaborate. And even that first question, what do you want candidates to talk about? I think that was the platform for that as well.
Great. Thank you.
All right, and then I think we have our last slide. And basically, from that survey, we knew immigration was one of the big topics. And then obviously, as the Trump administration started, a lot of policies and actions, executive orders impacting, all the way to the local level. So we identified that as a issue that we wanted to help both CPR and Colorado News Collaborative help all the partner newsrooms. So we've created a database and spreadsheet where we have resources for potential sources for newsrooms to be able to, interview as they're covering, ICE actions in their communities. Colorado is obviously a big spot where that's been happening since it's been in the spotlight with Aurora. Right now, one of the counties is, a sheriff deputy is being sued by the attorney general because they were collaborating with ICE. So we have so many storylines with that. So we've identified immigration as a place to really help partner newsrooms continue. And at the same time, we're evaluating tools that could possibly be used for midterm elections. We haven't gone full in those discussions, but we are starting to have them as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So I want to reflect back, and we're going to keep revisiting this particular project now that we've gotten the overview as we talk about challenges and engagement. But I heard, I think, 3 specific areas you mentioned, and maybe there are some other ones in terms of challenge. What I heard was the idea that it could have been a challenge to have trust with your partner organizations, but in this case, that was already existing, right? Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. I think a big part of this, it's not just the engagement, it's the collaboration part. And I think if we didn't have that from the get-go, it would have been really hard and just, I think, take a lot of time to have those trust building conversations.
And then I heard you speak a bit about the data collection not always coming in accurately because of the cookies, autofilling stuff, and that was an unexpected sort of tech glitch that happened that you had to adjust to meet. And then the third area I was hearing you talk about a little bit is just sort of the advanced planning that's needed, particularly for outreach and particularly based on, limited resources to use. Is that capture pretty well what we've covered so far?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, with that in mind, then, we're going to turn to this idea of challenge in our projects and how we, as journalists, as practitioners, can have a mindset that allows us to meet these challenges effectively when they come up. And I'll tell you, about a month after I started at Harkin in 2018, a news director who shall remain nameless came up to me at an event and said, we tried engagement, by which they meant they had done one engagement outreach initiative. It didn't work. We're not going to do it again. And so, like, a piece of my soul died a little bit because it was this idea that you have to succeed immediately at every single time in order for this to be effective. And so when we talk about challenges and engagement, and this section in particular may be useful if you have any higher ups at your newsroom, anyone you need to make the case for, anyone who's evaluating your engagement efforts as a product instead of a process. This may be a useful section for you to share with them as well. So let's open it up to the room. I know we got challenges. I know we do. Either something you have thought or heard, or something you've heard someone say, I'd like to engage, or I'd like to engage more, or I'd like to try this project, but ... Help me fill in the dots here. But what? Pop in the chat or just shout it out loud. I'd like to engage, but I don't have time. Yup. That's a good one. What else? I'd like to engage, but what have you heard? What have you said? What have you thought? What are some reasons? I don't know where to start. That's a really good one. Thank you. I don't know where to start. I'll only get the usual suspects. Mm-hmm. We're stretched too thin. I'm solo. How do I do this on my own? But I'm solo. I'll only get the usual suspects. Like get the usual suspects. Maybe this question around we'll get the same crowd. Yeah, we have limited resources. Time is a resource as well. Thank you so much. And these are all true. Like, I'm not saying these are not relevant or valid or anything like that. These are all valid reasons to really think about why you're engaging and what it's worth pursuing. And so I'd like to introduce you to this chipper little guy who's about to embark on an engagement project. This lucky person. They know exactly what they want to do. They know exactly how they're going to get there, right? And then what happens? What happens to this well-intentioned person who has had all the best laid plans, right? Something comes up, something that they couldn't have foreseen, right? That suddenly they're in this slump and they're saying, we're never going to do engagement again. There's actually a term for this that I was really excited to learn about, and I've talked about this in the collaborative journalism environment as well. So real briefly, I'm going to introduce you to the learning pit. So this is from the field of education. James Nottingham, who you see here, he's an author, consultant, and educator. He developed this framework in the mid-1990s. And it's based on research showing that students learn more deeply if they struggle productively with concepts. So this is a reframe. Struggle doesn't mean we have failed. Struggle mean we're learning, right? And so I actually talked to him about how this might translate to newsrooms. And there's 4 steps in the new learning pit. And if you've ever struggled to learn something new, you have been in the learning pit. First, you're like, oh no, something didn't work that I was expecting, right? And then you move into, well, why didn't it work? This is where you start getting productive. You start getting curious. Why didn't it work? Stephanie with looking at, oh, why is the data filling in kind of weird? You ask questions, you see where there's a difference between what you expect and what happened. You give people time to figure it out, right? And then you can move forward to learn, right? Then you're able to say, oh, well, now we can just reach back out and see if those same people can fill it out again. You talk about it, you compare your ideas. And then, and this is something we, I think, don't always do very effectively when we've done an engagement project, you consider what you've learned and how you might apply it moving forward. Stephanie had a couple examples right there about how to apply it moving forward. And the debriefs here, right? So crucial to understand what we've learned. And when you go through this process, the difference between just sort of giving up and being like, well, it didn't work, right? You haven't really learned anything except it didn't work because you haven't moved forward from that initial fall. Or frankly, if you do things that are like guaranteed success and don't stretch you in any way, like that's fine. You've reached your marker and that can work, but you haven't grown. You end up the same level you started out at. When you have these challenges, when you fall into the pit over time, your learning increases, right? You end up each project, each iteration, each outreach effort higher than you were before, right? And that's the power. You may have challenges, you may fall down, unexpected things may come up, but in the long run, you unleash the power of the pit, you're able to grow your abilities. And Stephanie, I'm curious, because you haven't heard me talk about this before, is this resonating with you at all in your experience with Voter Voices? Do you feel like you came out of that maybe with new capabilities? And say no, I'm just asking.
No, yeah, I would say it. I think what really helped is just frequently checking in, evaluating what's working, what's not, and
Yeah.
really asking the why and digging deep into that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, oh my gosh. Yes. 100,000,000% to the person who said AI is anti-learning pit. So when we go into these engagement projects, expecting that there will be challenges and that we will have to, adjust as we go, it does change the way that experience feels, and it changes how we respond. Here's another sort of expectation graphic that I love. This is from IDEO. This is called How the Journey of a Project Feels. And you like plunge into this valley of despair and then hopefully like come back into the other side with some additional confidence. And in learning pit terms, right, you would actually come out higher on the other side. And I would show this when I'm launching projects with newsrooms. I'll literally show them this graphic and they kind of shake their head at me like, oh, but we'll be fine. I'm like, will we though? Or are we going to plunge into the valley of despair and have to come out the other side? So there's questions you can ask yourself, right? And you can prepare to be challenged, even if you can't know in advance what specifically the challenges will be. And I think this is a way in which engagement journalism really challenges us to be adaptive and iterative in our approach, because we want to control for every single variable, right? We want that success. But it's always changing, always moving. We're engaging with real people and real communities. Some things are going to work, some things aren't. And that doesn't mean we're bad if we're only like doing a bad job and failing if we don't take those steps to increase our understanding. And so these are questions, and welcome other, submissions from the people in the room here. These are conversations you can have just to sort of have an idea of like, okay, we know there's going to be challenges, but what will we do when? Let's just say when the time comes, right? Too many pits may demotivate a person. That's an interesting point. I wonder if the demotivation though comes if you haven't increased your understanding and then also like found a way to apply it moving forward. So let's talk a bit about like, how can you tell things are going wrong, right? And Stephanie, I have a question for you here. You mentioned you got 7,200 responses. How were you thinking about the objectives of the Voter Voices Project at the outset, like when you were just planning?
Yeah, I think because we, had done this it was just the Colorado Public Radio newsroom, just the goal of having more than the couple of hundred we had initially, I think we held that. And I think we knew it was just going to be a conversation with so many newsrooms of just having them all aligned, I think would be like the goal initial. So we had, small goals, but just knowing that we were doing it in the first place with this big of a group was kind of like the goal to see if we can pull that off.
So like see if everyone can come together around this initiative. Obviously, you have to meet the deadline. It doesn't do anything good if it comes out after November. Yeah, it comes down to goals and metrics, right? That's how you can tell if things are going off track. And that's why it's so essential to have those conversations early on in the process. Because measuring something ends up determining what we do to reach that goal. I would hazard a guess that if your goal for Voter Voices was reach voters in every single county in the state, that would have really changed your outreach efforts, right? Or, pick your goal. And so when we think about what we're measuring, it's really crucial, and you know this, but I want to speak about this specifically in terms of the challenges to engagement. If you set that bar either too high, or if you try to measure something that's kind of impossible to measure, like talk about a challenge, you're going to send your whole project trying to reach an impossible level. And so when you're thinking about your goals and you're thinking about your metrics, only choose a couple, make it something that will be easy to see whether you're on track or not. And crucially, using that learning pit, when you start going off track, that doesn't mean you just throw up your hands and say, I have failed. It means you figure out whether and how you can get back on track. So we've got an example here for elections coverage. And anybody want to share like any goals, metrics you've used relative to engagement efforts? I saw a lot of interest in the chat around community listening sessions, right? How do you measure goals and engagement for that? You said understanding what people want to hear from us. Maybe it's number of questions. Maybe it is people like voting on how well they felt heard by their experience with you. Stephanie, you were obviously measuring questions. Anything you want to say here about what you found useful to see like how you were doing relative to your goals?
Yeah, I think what helped was having our team member create these maps that kind of showed visually how we were doing without so much having a specific number that, you kind of feel bad if you weren't attaining, but more of like, hey, we got one more person in this corner of the state, and just I think keeping it reasonable and not too ambitious to,
Mhm.
because anything over would be great.
And were you like sharing that out as you went then instead of just like waiting until the very end?
Absolutely, yeah. And we created coverage, or we created stories out of that. We're like, so far we've heard from this amount of you, and here's a map. We'd love to hear from more of you. So we took our audience along that journey of
Mm.
what we were able to do, and we created content out of it, but also kind of in a way of transparency of letting them know how we were doing.
I love that. And that's something I hear too. That's a fear people have is that, well, you've said a couple times, it's not a scientific survey. Like, well, we won't be able to reach everybody. I'm like, okay, yes. Is that a reason to reach nobody? Like, if the option is everybody or nothing, like, it's gonna be nothing unless you signal really clearly, like, hey, we're trying to reach, could you help us? And continue reaching out. All right, so let's get down to it. Let's go step by step through the phases of an engagement project and talk about the challenges. And I really hope to see everyone continuing that great participation in the chat or by speaking up, because we want to hear from you too about challenges you've faced, and then get this incredible expertise in the room here to bear on how we might learn, climb out of the pit to move forward. So if you were in the last session, this will look familiar. Again, that recording and resources are in the chat for you. But we typically think about 4 phases for an engagement effort, and you really just sort of build on this over time. It's a feedback loop, right? You start by inviting input from the public for voter voices. What issues do you want the candidates to be talking about? They respond, provide that input. Maybe there's a glitch in the tech and you have to like invite them to respond. And then you craft your content in response to that, the great stories that Stephanie shared about how your vote will affect this issue. And then publishing that and following it with participants flows right into the next thing. So now they're covering immigration. So I have put down here a few example challenges that might come up during that first half of the feedback loop. So when you're inviting input from the public. Stephanie, you mentioned like you need to have trust with organizations, but I also want to hear from you, right? What challenges have you seen? So we'll run through a few examples and a few ways you can respond to those challenges, but let's all get involved here because we're all in this together trying to climb out of that pit. Problem number 1, no one responds. It's just like you put out and call for participation and you just get crickets back. Stephanie, obviously, this isn't something you ran into with Voter Voices specifically, but have you ever been in a situation like that, or anyone want to share an experience in the chat? Crickets is the worst. Yep, feels terrible. Expanding our reach to new votes. Or have you always been fairly good, Stephanie, at getting like at least some responses back to what
Yeah,
you're
I think it's, if we are not getting anything online, that's where like, okay, we're gonna go to some coffee shop, we're gonna grab someone, and they're usually
Hey.
less likely to say no when you're in their face and asking nicely, and so yeah.
It's harder to say no when you're looking someone in the eyes. Yeah, I think that's great. So you said going out, so like changing the way of your asking. I would say you can also look for partnerships there. Like if you're not connected to the community you're trying to reach, what other groups might be that this could be valuable for them to bring to their communities, and refining the value too. Something we say a lot at Harkin is, don't just ask people about issues or topics, ask them what questions they have, because it's a lot more actionable to say, why are prescription drug prices so high, than to get a response to like, what issue do you care about? And they say healthcare. I'm like, okay, but what about healthcare? So yeah, crickets can be a signal that you just need to refine your update. Ooh, I'm trying to keep up with the chat here too. Another problem, trolls responses aren't useful. You know, you ask, people are just getting on their soapboxes and it's not really anything you can do something with. Is it time to walk away? Right? I would say that's an example to reframe your prompt, right? Try to get more specific about what you actually can promise to deliver on. Stephanie, anything to add to this one? And it's fine if not.
I think just in general, I wanted to address what Dave had asked in the chat box of especially conservative voters and or conservative community members and engaging them. I think that's why it was so helpful to be able to partner with newsrooms in rural parts who may have those connections with the community. If it wasn't for them, I don't think we would get the amount of conservative responses that we did because of those relationships that they already had, and really just like any nonprofit that works in that area. I think that's a key one, especially if you're going in without any kind of relationships. Partnering with those who already have them is key.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing that up, Dave. I know that Trusting News is doing a lot of really good work, even on the language we use and how that can send signals. Even a word like democracy and democratic might send signals to certain audiences about, perceived bias. Um, oh no, we got too much. It's like the opposite of crickets. And Stephanie, I'm curious. I mean, you had 7,200 responses. That's a lot of responses. Did you have to make any adjustments based on getting back a lot of information?
I would say I'm trying to remember back to like the original, just the conversations we had on the surveys and all of that. But I think it was more of we really painstakingly had conversations about that language of how we were going to set it up. And I think even when we were reporting on the data so far, we made sure to when we were having quotes from the audiences, had conservative quotes that we had in there, and acknowledging. I think part of it is just acknowledging like we still need to hear more, and we acknowledge our blind spots.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And having an automatic acknowledgement can really help too. Just saying like, thank you so much for your submission. We will, we will include it in our future reporting, and like just some way to show that it mattered. It's not like Stephanie said about her work, it's not a scientific survey, right? So it's okay, truly, as long as you're very transparent about your process to sample and say, we got tons of responses and here's a selection, right? See if you can automate, see what support you can have to sort of pull out those themes. Stephanie, in terms of your work, did you go through and individually code each response? Was it helpful because you would set it up to be like predetermined topics instead of just
exactly.
yeah.
I think that's what we wanted to make sure. And just our innovation editor, he was able to code it so the files we were able to export from Harken and just organize it all. And yeah.
Beautiful. So you were able basically to deliver on your promise. So I would say every engagement activity is a promise you're making to the people you're engaging with, and to have those conversations about whether you can deliver on those promises. All right, what am I missing? These first two phases, what are other challenges that people have seen come up? Let's talk about that for a minute here, or maybe you're currently seeing when you're inviting input from the public. What do we got?
I have one, not knowing what to ask.
That's a good one. All right. Stephanie, we got any thoughts on not knowing what to ask?
I think it's okay that you don't know, that you just start with conversations.
I do like to, if you're going to kind of beta test what you're asking, you've had those goals conversations, and then test it out just to people in your life and see if their eyes like light up with recognition for what you're asking about, or just kind of are like, what the huh? And you like wait until you phrased it in a way that gets that light in their eyes. That's usually a pretty good indication. Good question. What else? Oh, now we've started over. Oh, internal disagreement. There couldn't possibly be internal disagreement at a newsroom. Which questions? How many questions? Tone of the questions, leading questions. I mean, partially, Dave, it's just having a super clear chain of command, right? Who's ultimately the decider when it comes to these things? Stephanie, anything you want to share when it comes to like disagreements internally in the newsroom about how to go about this outreach?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's why I said earlier of like conversations, it's like it can take forever if you bring in so many different people with so many different opinions. So we did keep the group of the decision makers for the questions, well-rounded, but, manageable. I think there was like 5 of us, because everyone has different opinions, and it could be one word choice that, lingers and has debate over. So I would say these conversations help clear it out. And I think we just kind of acknowledge like this is the best we could do based on all the different conversations we had, and just go out there and see how they respond.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're coming down to 10 minutes left. So be sure if you have burning questions, whether or not it's related to what's going on here, be sure to put those in the chat. I'll give an example from Santa Cruz Local that we have in one of our case studies. The resources to organize listening sessions specifically for their work was really intense. They told us it took 2 months of planning and significant staff time. So we're talking like half of their workload or more, and a contractor who worked with them for 5 to 10 hours a week. So in the future, and there's that learning, right? Learning pit, we've learned something that we can apply now. They would be looking at deeper partnerships with community organizations to share the workload, because sometimes it can turn out to be just like much more logistical work, especially if you're doing those sort of in-person sessions than you'd expect. And that's one way to address that. All right, so let's move on to this third phase here. So you've actually gotten back responses that you're ready to respond to with your journalism. And that could be a story, it could be something else. Let's talk about problems that happen here. You've gotten the responses. Now what do? Oh, we don't have time. We don't have capacity. Stephanie, anything you want to say when on the time question specifically?
Yeah, we definitely ran into this. I think what helped is we had ambitious deadlines that we were able to push back, and it's like, okay, this is the absolute deadline to get something out there. And like, I think it's nice to kind of shoot for your goal of this is what we want, and it's okay to go from we want 2 stories on this specific topic, this kind of thing, and then we kind of go with, okay, 1 story, 500 words, and that's just more manageable. So I think it's okay to have goals and then just get realistic about it.
I don't know if this rings true to your experience, but sometimes it's almost like there's project-itis, where it's like, because we put all this work into this effort, we have to make something really huge in response. But like a 500-word story or like a 2-minute story can be fine as well, depending on what your goals are. Ooh, okay, I want to see this. So there was a handful of responses to this outreach. So then asking questions and sharing reliable info when people needed it most, excellent relevance, was really useful. Thank you for sharing that. So mini version can be good. I'll also say I love stop doing lists. The American Press Institute has a good sort of walkthrough on how to do this. What are we doing right now that we maybe don't need to do? And that's just a good way to free up some time for what really does matter. Skewed angle. And what I mean by this is maybe the responses you got are outside really your mission and your commitment to your community, and what people are asking for is not something, for whatever reason, that your newsroom is prepared to deliver. Okay. Just because someone suggested it in engagement does not mean you have to do it. Editorial judgment still applies. Staying aligned to your mission and values still applies. And it's perfectly acceptable to just say, you know what, this is sort of out of our wheelhouse. Thank you for your interest. If you want to send them somewhere else that might be able to address their concerns, you can. That's up to you. Stephanie, anything to add there? Any thoughts there?
No, I think that was I think what you said too is like identify what's the clear mission, stick to that. Anything extra is extra, and don't let it get in the way of continuing that.
Thank you. Maybe you just don't have the expertise that you need to produce what seems to be warranted, right? And that gets back to sort of the promise you make to your community. Look into partnerships, look into right-sizing the content. We don't need to be victims of project-itis. Other questions about this particular phase? What are some other issues that might come up when you're actually crafting the content in response to your outreach or services? Oh, did we capture every challenge that might happen during this phase? Stephanie, anything you think I'm missing here? Ooh, choosing which topics. Stephanie, I would like to give you first crack at that one. How do you choose which topics to report?
So again, with the survey, it was easy to point back to what people let us know, but I will iterate what you had said about it's, do we have the resources available? Do we have anyone that's their beat that can speak to that? And if not, we decide that way.
Does that get to your question? Skewed angle, maybe take notes and see if there's emerging common theme. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you so much. All right, so I'll go right to the last phase here, when you're actually producing and following up and acknowledging. Again, crickets this time on the consumption side, right? You're so excited, you've done this big thing, and whomp. It's not getting very many views. It's not getting very many shares. It just sort of lands like a lead balloon. What are some solutions to this? Chalk it up to learning and move on. Like that's actually totally legitimate to do. Or recycle it. You know, maybe there's a way to make this resource evergreen. Maybe there's a way to find partners to share it out for the people it would be relevant to. This comes up a lot when people use community engagement versus audience engagement. So talking to people that are not as familiar with them and their brand as the people who already consume their content regularly. And so if it does fall flat, you know, rather than just walking away, what can you do with that given your time and capacity? Ghosting the community, again, living up to that promise. We have people who like go out and do engagement. Maybe they do a listening tour. They go somewhere new they've never been before, but then they never come back, right? And again, that just comes back to really being very clear about the promise you are making to those communities and also maybe pointing them to other places that might be able to help. Recognizing, you know, what you can do and then pointing them to resources. It doesn't always have to be all of us. Any thoughts there, Stephanie? Has that come up for you at all with Colab?
I'm not sure if this is part of that, but it did remind me of something I did want to share before about kind of closing that feedback loop is we sent, and we encouraged other newsrooms to do that. We did that obviously with Colorado Public Radio, and we created templates for others, but to close that feedback loop, send emails to those who engaged. We sent them a link to the voter guide to say, this is how we used your responses. We thanked them. And so I think that really was important to make sure that they felt like they weren't ghosted as well.
I love that. Yeah. Because otherwise you send something in, you're like, what happened with this? We just can't keep this up, right? We can't keep up this level. This would be the not sustainable as ongoing bullet of engagement, of promise. Be upfront about it, right? Voter Voices was time limited, right? We are doing this over this period of time, and this is what we're going to produce in response. Set those expectations, or you know what? If you get a really overwhelming response and your community, your audience is hungry for information and resources that you're not currently equipped to provide to them, well, guess what? Now you've got a really good pitch to make for some support to make that possible. All right, last one, then we're going to bring it home. Other questions, Stephanie, other challenges we want to talk about here? Open call for challenges, whether for this phase or for something else. Anything from Voter Voices, Stephanie, we didn't cover in terms of what you've learned, what you're going to apply moving forward? Because I really love this as a way to get at how you can grow from these initiatives.
Yeah. I will say when, you know, again, the recycling part of solutions reminded me that one thing we did do for the 2024 election was we realized in the 2022 midterms that folks really were hungry for content regarding judges. And we had put out this really easy story of how to judge a judge, and it did really well, but you know, we just didn't have the capacity to dig deep into every judicial candidate. And so we recycled that story because it was still relevant topics of how they should judge a judge, and we were able to recycle that there. So even within our bigger project, there were still time constraints, and recycling really helped.
Thank you so much. And I'll note the one last challenge we have is timely coverage / timing, just how to get it out at the right time for the right community. Again, making those promises and having those conversations about what can be possible. Yeah, Judge a Judge is great. Yeah, that's incredible. All right, we're bringing it home. Excellent job. I've got a couple coming attractions, and then I want to be sure we use our last minute and a half here to get to anything that is on your mind that we didn't address today. Here at Harken, we do have, hey, it's almost fall. It's a great time to think about engagement for fundraising. If you want to join us, it's not just for people who use Harken's tech. Please do feel free to join. And also available now from the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas in partnership with Advancing Democracy is A Better Way to Cover Civic Life. Totally free, massive online open course about how to really apply both solutions, engagement, trust building coverage to your democracy work. We're also part of the Democracy Day Collaborative. So our friends at the Center for Cooperative Media, and Will, if you're on the call, if you want to go ahead and drop a link right now, they're currently conducting a quick survey on what your newsroom needs to support your democracy reporting. So check out that link. There you go, Will. Please do fill that out. Yeah, it's a really worthwhile effort and a really great group looking to support democracy reporting. And there's one more bonus. I just happened to notice this as I was putting together my presentation on backgrounding candidates that's coming out starting tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank Stephanie, you so much for being here, for telling us about voter voices, and for really exemplifying what it means to approach engagement as a learning opportunity and not an only success or failure, sort of proposition. And thank you all for being here. Thank you to my dog for alerting me that there are people in the house. And Jessel, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for such an engaging session. I'm sure everyone took something away from this that they can start using in their own practice in their own communities. Really appreciate everyone really coming to this meeting and really participating strongly. You will get that recap email from me that has the recording and the resources mentioned here. Bridget mentioned a few things, and specifically for the Knight Center training, that MOOC, anyone that finishes that MOOC and completes the whole thing gets free training. And there's a limited amount of training available, so we really encourage you to sign up for that MOOC and get free coaching from the Advancing Democracy team. And the next Advancing Democracy sessions will be on solutions journalism. So we'll send out those links as well in that recap email. So I'll stick around if you have any questions, but thank you so much, everybody, and have a great week.